Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and I'm here today at the Rock Island Auction Company, where we are taking a look at a pair of semi-auto Israeli Galil rifles, one in 5.56 and one in 7.62. Now, the history of the Galil really dates to the 1967 Six-Day War. The Israelis fought this war armed primarily, talking infantry rifles, with the FAL, and their opponents primarily with the AK. And the Israelis found that their FALs didn't really perform as reliably as they had hoped in the sandy, dusty desert conditions of this war. And yet the AKs that they were facing, even when really treated with complete neglect and lack of maintenance, those AKs kept on running. And they looked at this and decided, well, maybe we should find something other than the FAL, you know. It's big and heavy, and it didn't work all that well. So they put together a couple series of tests to come up with a replacement for the FAL. And the first series was just kind of a basic thing. And they looked at the M16 and the Stoner 63 and the AK, the AKM it would have been at that point, primarily, but not exclusively, milled and stamped AKs. They had captured actually quite a lot of AKs in the 1967 war, so they had a bunch of them to tinker with. And the result of this trial, the initial trial, was that the AK came out on top, was the best gun. Well, Israel wasn't particularly interested in adopting the 7.62x39 cartridge. They were much more interested in the 5.56 NATO cartridge. So they went to a second series of testing and also of rifle development. And ultimately, they would kind of put everything on the market through its paces. This second major test involved the M16, the Stoner 63, the Armalite AR-18, the HK-33, a couple rifles from Beretta and Steyr, I'm not sure exactly what models, and then two domestic rifles. They had a 5.56 rifle developed by Uziel Gal, the designer of the Uzi submachine gun, and one designed by Israeli Galil. Now, Galil, we should go back and discuss him a little bit. Galil was originally born in 1923 in Russia and emigrated to Israel as a young child. And his birth name was actually Mishmar Hayardin. I'm probably butchering the pronunciation there. But like many Jewish immigrants to Israel before Israel's independence, he changed, well, and after actually, he changed his name to something a little more Hebrew Jewish sounding. So he actually changed his name to Yisrael Balashnikov with a B. Completely coincidental, actually has no relation to Kalashnikov, despite being virtually identical. So here we have now Yisrael Balashnikov in Israel. In 1940, he joins the Haganah, the Jewish militia. In 1948, pretty much right after Israel declares its independence, he joins IMI, Israeli Military Industries, and starts working for them. And he's one of the two guys who decides or is tasked with developing the AK into a 5.56 rifle for Israel. And during this developmental process, he put together a bunch of interesting prototypes using some of the features that the Israelis would go on to adopt for good in the Galil. In particular, things like converting bolt handles to be a little more ambidextrous, adding ambidextrous safeties to the rifles. I have seen a couple of Balashnikov prototypes, and they're interesting. There are a whole bunch of different varieties to them, and they're all kludged together. Kludged maybe isn't the right word. They're all modified, captured Eastern Bloc AKs that Israel wound up with as war booty after the Six-Day War. They got tons of these things. So let's just, we'll weld some safeties on this one. We'll change the barrel length on this one. He was apparently using primarily Stoner 63 magazines and barrels that he was adapting to fit AK receivers. And in the final major set of trials, Balashnikov's rifles ended up being the best ones. They came out the winner of the trials. Now, this left IMI in a position of, okay, that's the rifle that we want to go with, that the Army wants. Now, how do we go about producing it? And it was at that point that they actually ordered a handful, I think initially it was just 5, Valmet rifles from Finland. The Valmet being a really high quality, slightly modernized but milled AK. One of the, probably at the time, well not probably, without doubt at the time, the best quality AK you could get. The Israelis got these and liked them, and they ordered 100 more and really liked those, and they ended up getting the receiver dimensions. It's unclear to me whether they got them from Finland, or if they just reverse engineered the receivers they had gotten. At any rate, they ended up with the design specifications for the Valmet receiver and used that as the basis for the Balashnikov AK pattern in 5.56. Now, around this same time, Yisrael Balashnikov is deciding that this name isn't quite, it's still a little too Russian sounding, and apparently IMI was a little concerned that that naming the rifle after him would also sound a bit too Russian-like. Well, he changed his name to Israel Galil, and that kind of solved the problem. They went ahead and named the rifle after his new adopted name, and hence called it the Galil. So let me bring the camera in close, and let's show you what Galil, Balashnikov turned Galil, did to make this such an interesting AK variant. Let's start at the muzzle end here and go through all of the changes to the Galil, because really there's actually quite a lot of them. Very few parts of this rifle survived unscathed from the original AK design. So at the beginning, we have a muzzle device here that is capable of launching rifle grenades. You can recognize that sort of thing, by the way, when you see bits like this wire spring. That's on there as a tensioner so that you can slip a rifle grenade on and it won't just fall off if you point the rifle slightly downwards. So, rifle grenade capability. We then have a nice front sight post out here along with a night sight. You can flip that up. This would have originally been luminous. It would glow in the dark. The tritium or radium that they use there, probably tritium? To be honest, I'm not entirely sure what the element was, but it is dead now. Half-life has gone. Unlike the AK, which is just a drift adjustable front sight, the Galil has a much more precise screw adjustable windage setup. We then also have a bipod built into the rifle. There are versions with and without. In general, the Galil AR does not have a bipod. The ARM does. This is the shorter barreled version for civilian export, which does not have a bayonet lug, but the standard Israeli military ones would also have a bayonet lug there. This is a pretty simple bipod. Pretty lightweight bipod, I should say. Folds out like so. And there you go. This little opening in the bipod mounting block actually doubles as a wire cutter. You can put a piece of wire in there and then open the bipod up like that and use it to shear wire off. That's a deliberate design. And of course, I have to mention the fact that yes, it was also intended to work as a bottle opener. So the two bipod retaining hooks back here are the right dimension and size to fit a bottle cap. The reason for that, there we go, when you don't have the bipod in there. The reason for that was Israeli soldiers had previously had a tendency to use magazine feed lips to open bottles. You put the edge of the bottle cap under one of those, pop it open, obviously not a Galil mag, but FAL or Uzi mags, and that would lead to damage to the feed lips over time. And so rather than just like yell at the soldiers and try and get them to stop doing it, they just gave in to the inevitability and added a bottle opening feature or capability to the rifle here where it's not going to actually hurt anything. A carry handle was added to the side of the rifle. It's interesting, on some of the Balashnikov guns, you'll see weird stuff like a FAL carry handle welded to the side of the receiver. On the actual military guns, they went ahead and added that feature to the rear handguard retainer. The charging handle has been extended upwards to make it somewhat ambidextrous so that you can reach over the top of the gun and charge it in an attempt to take the fairly left-handed AK and make it a little bit more ambi. The magazine release was also improved a bit. There's this big tab here to prevent you from accidentally bumping the mag release. And then, in sort of a counterintuitive thing, because that gets in the way, then they extend the mag release off to the side so that you have access to it more easily. The magazines were originally based on the Stoner 63 mag, but they are not Stoner mags. This is a proprietary IMI designed magazine. Standard magazines for the 5.56 Galil were 35 rounds, and they did also make a 50-round magazine, which was primarily intended for the ARM, the sort of quasi-squad support or light machine gun role. Definitely the primary ever used was the 35-rounder here. In 7.62, by the way, they had 25-round magazines. We have a standard sort of safety. Of course, this one's semi-auto and pinned here, and the receiver is not capable of taking the full auto parts. But in addition to that, Galil also added an ambidextrous thumb safety on the left side. So as a right-hander, you can hold the rifle here, the selector's on safe, push it forward to the fire position. And this is just a mechanical connection on that same safety lever. So when you operate this, it also operates the lever there. The rear sight here is also a vast improvement over the standard AK. It is a two-position peep sight with also a rear night sight there. You can use this as a close-up, very quick sort of sight. The peep sight has a detent on it specifically to set it in the middle there, where it's just low enough that it's out of your line of sight to use the flip-up night sight there. And of course, this rear sight is mounted on the back of the receiver cover instead of on the back of the barrel like on the AK. That allows them to use an aperture sight, which is more precise, and it gives you a much longer sight radius, which is definitely a nice thing. Excellent sights, and that's basically copied directly from the Valmet. The rear tab on the mainspring here has been extended. That allows you to shoot rifle grenades without the top cover popping off of the gun. They added an optics mounting rail right here. This is a proprietary Israeli mount. And to be honest, they don't seem to have used it all that much. You can find mounts out there for things like AN/PVS-2 early night vision scopes, as well as other optics, but the Israelis never seem to really exploit that all that much. And having gotten to the very back of the rifle, they have a folding stock on here. These were also available with fixed stocks, but folders are kind of the more common, the more military pattern. This is based on the FAL stock, and it's a really good stock. So you've got a nice, very solid lock up there. All you have to do is pull it down to fold it. Locks into position there. And no locking latch, just swing it out to extend it. In 1983, IMI released a version of the FAL in 308, or in 7.62 NATO. This was exclusively for export. The Israeli military never adopted or used these rifles, but they're pretty cool. I think the biggest contract for them went to Colombia. In the 1980s, Colombia bought a whole slew of these to replace their G3 rifles. And these were also sold on commercial import in the United States. And that's, of course, what this one is, one of the semi-auto ones. These are probably most recognizable at a distance from their sort of waffle pattern magazine. This is a 25-round magazine. They did also make a 12-rounder for the 7.62 guns. Other than the scaled up design, making these a little bit bigger, everything else is identical to the standard 5.56 caliber Galils. All the features are the same, as you can see here. There were a couple different versions of these released on the semi-auto market, both the 5.56 and 308. You'll find both shortish and longish barrels. The 308, I believe it was either 18 or 20 inch. On the 5.56, I believe it was 16 and 20 inch, or 16 and 21 inch. You'll also find them with both fixed and folding stocks. Note that the 7.62 one here, they actually added a little rubber butt plate to the end of the stock. We can take just a brief moment here to look at the internal mechanics. I don't want to do too much of this because it's basically identical to the AK, but the top cover has a little bit of reinforcing here, and the connection of the top cover to the receiver, the tolerancing was tightened up in order to make it a secure and stable mount for the rear sight. This comes apart exactly the same as a regular AK until you get to the gas tube. By the way, we do have a slightly different design to the front of the gas piston there, more similar to the AKS-74U, the so-called Krinkov, than the standard AK. But they did make the gas tube a little more easily detachable in that it just slides off and it's dovetailed into the rear trunnion, or the front trunnion here, and then nests on top of the gas block up here. So the original AK had a lever release that you had to rotate on this block, or on the rear sight block that was also here. Because there is no rear sight block, there is no, can't mount it on something that isn't there. So instead, you get this slide out, dovetailed gas tube. So the Galil ended up being adopted formally by the Israeli military in 1972, although it was never fully issued out, never fully equipped the Israeli army, in large part because they ended up getting a lot of very inexpensive, if not free, surplus M16 rifles from the US, and free is kind of hard to compete with. The Galil was still an expensive rifle to produce. It's a very high quality rifle. It's an excellent rifle, but because of that cost, never got fully adopted. And then it was phased out by about 2000, being replaced by the new Tavor bullpups. So in addition to Israel, these were also actually sold to a surprising number of countries. A lot of Central and South American countries, Guatemala, Nicaragua, Colombia, like I said, bought 308s. This would also be the basis for the R4 rifle in South Africa. There was a lot of collaboration between the Israelis and the South Africans to the point that early South African R4s were actually made and exported complete by IMI. And then years later, IMI would actually buy complete rifles from South Africa. So that went both ways. Estonia bought these, Portugal bought these, really a lot of clients for the Galil. And that doesn't take into account the US semi-auto civilian market. There would be a series of companies to import the Galil in semi-auto form into the United States for the US civilian market. The first was Magnum Research. That was later replaced by Action Arms, who also did a lot of business with the Uzi. And then finally Springfield, Springfield Armory, the private company, not the government armory, would import them until ultimately the 1989 assault weapons import ban prohibited importation of guns like this, and then the supply dried up. In total, something like 7,000 to 9,000 of these original IMI manufactured rifles were imported before the ban went into effect. Now we have a lot more of them today. Century Arms sold a whole bunch of what they were calling Golanis, which are slightly different because those were actually built on parts kits from, I believe, Nicaragua, one of the South American countries that purchased Galils from IWI later on. So those Golanis are the Galil design, but not actually Israeli issue guns. So that's, for what it's worth, that's where the Golanis came from, South America. At any rate, these original early imports are, of course, the best pattern of Galil because they are original, actual IMI manufactured, just imported into the US back when that was legally an option. So pretty cool to have both a minty, gorgeous 5.56 as well as a 7.62 here. So if you'd like to add either one of these to your own collection, you can take a look at the description text below because they are both being sold at Rock Island coming up. The link below there will take you to ForgottenWeapons.com, and from there I have links to both of the catalog pages for these two rifles, where you can find Rock Island's catalog pictures, price estimate, description, all that sort of good stuff. Thanks for watching.